The carrier was already inside the choke point when the sea around it began to fill with engines. Not one or two radar blips, not a fishing cluster, a spreading ring of fast contacts punching out from the Iranian side of the Strait of Hormuz, cutting across the traffic lanes, crossing bows, stacking wake over wake until nearly 50 speedboats were shaping the same question at once. How close can they get before the Americans decide this is no longer theater? In that strip of water, where merchant ships move like trains on rails and a nuclear carrier cannot simply turn away, every minute stolen by hesitation belongs to the attacker. The U.S. ship at the center of that geometry was a moving airbase carrying thousands of sailors, billions in hardware, and the political weight of Washington itself. Around it rode the usual shield, destroyers out on the screen, helicopters cycling above the formation, combat information centers glowing below decks, every console manned, every watch team already used to the Gulf's bad habits. But the Strait punishes routine. The shipping lanes are narrow, the coast feels close enough to touch, and small boats can hide among merchant traffic, islands, and shoreline clutter until the closing rate becomes a problem instead of a contact report. That is why these moments matter far beyond the bridge of one warship. Hormuz is not just another patch of water, it is the valve on a huge part of the world's oil and gas flow, a corridor every Navy studies and every energy market fears. A confrontation there does not stay local for long. Insurance spikes, tankers reroute, allies call, traders panic. Capitals start reading intent into every radio transmission. If a U.S. carrier is challenged inside the strait and looks uncertain, the signal travels from Tehran to Riyadh to London to Beijing before the wakes have even flattened out. Iran knows that, and the Revolutionary Guard Navy has built an entire style of warfare around it. Not around matching the U.S. ship for ship, because that would be suicidal, but around compressing time and multiplying angles. Fast inshore attack craft, armed speedboats, rocket teams, machine guns, shoulder-fired missiles, maybe mines, maybe one crew willing to die on impact if the order ever comes. The idea is simple. A big warship can kill almost anything on the water, but it must identify, warn, sort, and justify before it fires. A swarm tries to break that sequence. It creates too many tracks, too many approach lines, too much ambiguity, and it does it in water so tight that every decision arrives late. On the carrier, nobody had to guess what made this so dangerous. A ship that size cannot sidestep like a patrol craft. Every course change has to consider escorts, civilian traffic, wind over deck, and the simple physics of steel and momentum. Even a minor maneuver inside a constrained lane can ripple through the whole formation. That means the defenders are making legal, tactical, and navigational judgments at the same time, while the attackers enjoy the freedom of speed. That afternoon, the boats did not come in as one theatrical pack for a photo opportunity. They came the way professionals would fear most. Dispersed, layered, and coordinated. Some ran parallel outside the formation, probing for reaction. Others sprinted across the front of the carrier group to force course adjustments. A second wave emerged from different bearings, using the clutter of commercial hulls and the background of the coast. A few slowed down deliberately, making themselves look harmless, while the faster craft kept pushing. From long range, it looked messy. From the carrier's tactical plot, it looked like a trap taking shape. The first response was measured because it had to be. Bridge-to-bridge warnings went out in English and Farsi. Helicopters moved lower to identify hulls and count weapons. Escorts shifted to put guns on likely approach sectors. Electronic surveillance teams listened for cueing from shore. No commander in that water wants to be the one who mistakes harassment for an actual attack and lights the whole Gulf on fire. But no commander can wait too long either, because a speedboat doing 40 knots can erase a mile of sea in less than 90 seconds. Then the range started collapsing. Boats that had been nuisance contacts became threat tracks. Several sliced inside the standoff bubble used for ordinary harassment. One pack drove toward the carrier's beam, where speed and numbers can turn even a giant ship into a constrained target. Another cut toward an escort, trying to split the screen and stretch attention. On the American side, warnings escalated. On the Iranian side, nobody turned away. This is the moment people misunderstand when they imagine a carrier as an untouchable floating fortress. A carrier is overwhelmingly powerful in open ocean. In constrained water against dozens of tiny craft with uncertain intent, power still matters, but timing matters more. You do not need to sink a carrier to create strategic damage. You only need to force hesitation, compel a hard maneuver near civilian traffic, trigger a politically messy exchange, or prove that the world's most powerful navy can be crowded in a channel barely wide enough for safe transit. That was the real weapon pointed at the Americans that day. Not just rockets or explosives, but a shrinking decision window. Inside combat, the sequence tightened fast. The carrier's escorts called out ranges in yards, not miles. Helicopters reported armed men visible in open boats. Infrared feeds showed motors pushed to maximum, wakes flattening into white scars behind the hulls. One U.S. destroyer shifted to warning posture with crew-served weapons manned and the 25mm ready. Another adjusted course to keep itself between the carrier and the densest cluster. The message was obvious. If you want the carrier, you go through the shield first. And then came the move that changed the entire mood of the fight. Far above the strait, 2 F-22 Raptors were already on regional patrol, part of the wider American posture built for exactly this problem. Not just a ship in danger, but a theater challenge that could widen without warning. The call from the Gulf did not ask them to dogfight boats. It asked them to do what the Raptor does better than almost anything else in the U.S. inventory: arrive fast, unseen at first, gather the whole picture, dominate the airspace, and force every hostile planner below to recalculate at once. The pilots came south at speed, descending out of high altitude with the advantage only stealth fighters possess. To the men in the boats, there was still only the noise of their own engines, the crackle of radios, and the looming gray wall of the carrier group ahead. To the operators on the U.S. side, the air picture suddenly widened. The Raptors were not there to strafe skiffs like action movie gunships. They were there to seal the lid on the battle space. They scanned for Iranian helicopters, coastal aircraft, missile queues, and any sign that the swarm on the water was only the first move. They gave the Americans what every commander craves in a crisis: certainty above the target area. That mattered immediately. A swarm is dangerous when it believes the fight is local. When it believes it is only dealing with the ships in front of it, it can gamble. The instant the airspace overhead belongs completely to the other side, the gamble changes. Every boat captain knows he is no longer part of a fast intimidation drill. He is now a tracked participant in a larger kill chain. The Raptors made that point brutally clear. They broke low enough to be seen, fast enough to be felt, and timed their pass across the formation as the Iranian boats were still trying to compress on multiple bearings. The effect was psychological and tactical at the same time. Heads snapped upward, wake lines wobbled, radios that had been full of speed and bravado turned into a mess of shouted bearings. The boats had expected the usual ladder of ship warnings and helicopter overwatch. They had not expected air dominance to arrive over their heads before the swarm had fully matured. Below, the U.S. Your surface force used the opening perfectly. Helicopters dropped smoke and fired warning bursts ahead of the lead boats. Loud hailers and bridge circuits blasted final instructions to alter course. The destroyers held disciplined fire, refusing to waste rounds into the mass until the threat sorted itself into clear priorities. This is where training shows, panic fires at everything. Professional crews build a hierarchy, boats with weapons exposed, boats driving at collision geometry, boats attempting to split the screen, boats maneuvering toward the carrier's path. Because each contact becomes a problem set, not a blur. A handful of Iranian craft kept coming anyway. One boat cut hard toward the bow sector of an escort, close enough to make every man on the gun line understand that the next 10 seconds might decide the whole encounter. Another appeared to raise a tube that could have been a rocket launcher. A third tried to swing behind commercial traffic and re-enter from a crossing angle. That was enough. The Americans were out of warning time. The first disabling fire was precise, not dramatic. Short bursts, engine space, waterline. One boat lost propulsion and slewed sideways into its own wake. A second took rounds across the stern and dropped off plane. Helicopter crews marked the shift instantly. The swarm was no longer a single intimidating mass. It was fragmenting into boats that still had intent, and boats suddenly wondering whether they wanted to die for a message that had already failed. Overhead, the F-22s stayed in motion, one higher, one lower, feeding awareness across the force and deterring any wider play from shore. And that was the part that shocked observers later. Not a missile strike, not some cinematic fireball from the sky. The shock was how quickly the presence of two stealth fighters changed behavior across an entire maritime confrontation. They were never designed to fight alone. They turned a close-range naval harassment into a multi-domain trap for the harassers. The Iranian formation began to lose its rhythm. Boats that had been charging in from separate bearings started turning at different times. Some accelerated out, trying to preserve face with speed. Others slowed and drifted just outside the last warning line, waiting for orders that no longer made sense. The most aggressive crews had run into the hardest truth of modern warfare. It is not enough to crowd a target if the target can still see, sort, and synchronize faster than you can close. For several more minutes, the strait held its breath. Guns stayed trained, helicopters orbited, the carrier kept moving, because stopping in Hormuz under pressure is its own kind of danger. Then the outer ring of Iranian boats peeled away, not all at once. Not cleanly, but enough to show the attempt had broken. The escorts maintained posture until the distances reopened and the geometry stopped favoring a rush. Only then did the formation relax by degrees, the way professionals do after surviving something that almost crossed the final line. No one on the American side celebrated. They understood how close the margin had become. In waters like that, a swarm does not need perfect execution. It only needs one boat to be misread, one warning to come late, one nervous gunner to fire too soon, one pilot overhead to be missing when the picture expands. The United States had avoided a larger fight, but it had also received a clear reminder: the Strait of Hormuz is the kind of battlefield where small craft and strategic consequences travel together. For Iran, the lesson cut both ways. The swarm had demonstrated reach, nerve, and the ability to generate global attention with cheap platforms and compressed timing. That is exactly why Tehran invests in them. But it also revealed the limit of that method against a force that stays disciplined under pressure and can bring air, surface, and command networks together in seconds. 50 boats looked menacing from a distance. Inside a functioning American kill chain, they became 50 vulnerable decisions. That is the deeper significance of the F-22 response. The Raptor did not win the day by acting like a patrol boat with wings. It won by denying Iran the wider battle it needed. No surprise layer from above, no freedom to escalate under coastal cover, no chance to convince the men in the boats that the Americans were trapped in a surface-only problem. In one pass, those fighters reminded everyone in the Gulf that a U.S. carrier is never just a ship, and a swarm is never fighting only the water around it. By sunset, the carrier group was still moving, the shipping lane was still open, and the world had another narrow escape to absorb. Oil traders would read the headlines, admirals would read the contact logs. Tehran would study video frame by frame, looking for how close its boats got and where the Americans chose to draw the line. Washington would do the same. Because deterrence is built as much from these gray zone confrontations as from wars themselves. The crisis ended without the catastrophic image Iran wanted and without the uncontrolled bloodshed America wanted to avoid. That is what made it so important. A carrier transited the most dangerous choke point on Earth. A swarm tried to turn geography into leverage, and the U.S. response proved that speed, discipline, and dominance across domains can break an ambush before the first full exchange begins. In the Strait of Hormuz, the side that controls the clock controls the fight.